let's say if a business owner's got someone on, they have given them a good time frame, and they are building someone up, and they're being patient. Like, what are the metrics that you look for that show average, good, great? Like, what do you kind of look to identify from a salesperson?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's very, very account specific and almost industry specific. Like if you take like BizOp, right? Like let's say someone who's selling like e-com stores to people who want to transition out of a 9 to 5. Like if you're selling that at like 30%, you're a rock star, like straight up bona fide rock star. But like in a coaching and consulting program, like where they're sort of being nurtured in its warm audience stuff, like I think you should be doing better than that. You know what I mean? But I think like the key is like setting a baseline of activity. So because everyone's kind of going to graduate, so it's hard to say like a close rate. You know what I mean? But you can have certain metrics. Like for me, I like to have a 50% cash to contract ratio. So like I incentivize my sales team to collect 50% cash, right? So they get a bonus if they do that, right? We also have like targets, like specific targets for them to hit. So like if I have a look at like 7th level, which I own, which is my coaching business, right? So, and I also do this for Sales Sniper and everything else is like I have my projections for the next 2 years based on like what I think is a reasonable, somewhat aggressive, but not over the top outlandish kind of projection. And then my whole team, all like the key leadership people are like, that's their goal. And so like they get remunerated when that goal is hit. So it's like every month, if we hit projection, they get a bonus, which helps the whole team kind of work together. And in the same way where like we have cash collection bonuses, we have PIF bonuses, we have like cash collection to contract value bonuses, and we have hitting revenue target bonuses. So that means that like we remunerate the entire team based off coming together under a common goal, which I think is super important because then you have like a collaborative yet competitive environment, but it's not like a gross competitive environment where everyone's just like, you know, trying to vie for bullshit, but you're kind of remunerated on a team. So I would say for setters, you definitely want activity, right? Like for our guys, if they're doing outbound dialing, it's a minimum $100 a day, right? That's a minimum, with the hope to do about 200, but obviously conversation rate's going to dictate a lot of that, right? So, they should be doing 100 outbound. Now, if they have maybe 20 calls and 20 pick up and they have 20-minute conversations, it's going to be a different story. But in general, that's what we're looking for. From there, we'll set a baseline over a 3-month period. So I don't really set many KPIs for the first 3 months. And then we set that first 3 months as the baseline of dials to pickups, pickups to conversations, conversations to bookings, bookings to show up to conversion to sales call if we're doing that, and then show up to sales call conversion. And then I track all the objections and stuff like that. So if we can set that as a baseline, then we can go, okay, for this particular account, that's the baseline. And then it's like, so all of our KPIs are going to be based on that. And then we'll reassess them every quarter and we'll just bump those numbers up. If it's getting easier and easier and easier and easier to hit the KPIs, then it's like, okay, cool. Then we need to kind of bump them up a little bit until we hit kind of an inflection point where it's like, okay, if we do this, we know that we have a predictable revenue from that particular source of leads or whatever it may be. Right. Because like, for example, like I would never have the same metrics for Facebook group leads as I would for Instagram leads. Right. Like IG leads just are not as good. Right. There's a shitload of them. Right. You know what I mean? Like TikTok leads, Jesus, mate, like they're just like, I mean, TikTok's clearly trying to take market share. Right. So like, they're just giving you cheap leads, you know, like that's the way I look at it. So you might as well make hay while the sun shines, but they're cheap as shit and they're terrible. So it's like, having the same metric for both is kind of silly. So it's like, well, I don't know what the metrics are going to be for TikTok. So let's just let it ride for 3 months, 2 months. And then from there, we'll look back, go over the data, and then we'll figure out what we could be doing better. Like what can we fix from a process? What can we fix from a skill? And what is just the nature of the beast? Like a podcast lead, you're going to close them every time, you know? Yeah. So like, I don't need the same metrics, you know? So it's a really difficult, it's one of those questions. It's like, the more you know, the more difficult that question becomes to answer. Whereas if you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, you go, oh, 30% close rate. You're like, well, okay. You know? So the more I dive into it, the more difficult those questions become to answer and the more nuanced they become, because like I'm in the back end of like 35 different 7 and 8 figure businesses now. And I've seen like there just is no cookie cutter when it comes to doing this correctly. And I think with time, they can all be figured out. It's just whether or not you can be afforded the time.